This episode of Made in America is brought to you by America's Inventor and Home Talk USA. Home Talk is a proud member of the King's Broadcasting Network, which has been bringing you the best in home-based innovation since 1998.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us for this episode of Made in America.
Welcome, America. That's right. This is the Chairman's Countdown with Zach Mottl, right here on the Made America Broadcasting Network. I am the Cajun contractor, Michael King, co-host with the show. And now I'd like to welcome my partner in crime, Mr. Zach Mottl. Mr. Zach, how you doing, my buddy?
Michael, how are you today?
I tell you what, I am so excited because this lineup you got for us today, wow. I tell you, last week, if you're just tuning in to last week's show, and heard the introduction to the Chairman's Countdown show here on the Made America Hour with Zach and myself and JonToomey and all the guests, man, it was just it was refreshing to put that education information because we've had an exciting week this week, a lot going on in Washington, D.C. Man, my stock is up when it was announced that the Fed chair next month will be lowering, I don't know how much, but will be lowering interest rates, and we're going to talk about that. But, man, when I saw my portfolio on Thursday, I was like, oh, Lord, I'm finally getting out of the red, but lot going on. But we got a great show. Why don't you take it over and tell our audience the excitement and what you got planned for us?
Well, Michael, I sure am excited about the interest rate cut, and I hope we get that. But you know what? Regardless of it, we're making sure that the stocks keep going up and America's stock keeps going up because we're making things here in America. We're making good jobs. And on that front, we had an exciting week here at the Coalition for a Prosperous America. Our team was out in Seymour, Indiana at our member, Guardian Bikes. They make bikes right here in America, and they opened a new factory. We're going to talk about that. We've got our special guest, Charles Benoit. He's the trade counsel from the Coalition for Prosperous America. He's going to come on and give us a little bit of an update. He was on stage at Guardian Bikes, and he had a little discussion with Shark Tank's own Mark Cuban. Mark was an original investor there. And we're also going to hit on some of the new tariffs going on with steel, the Section 232 tariffs. There's some upcoming action supposed to happen soon. And we've got a new bill in Congress called the Secure Trade Act. And this is about codifying a 10% tariff and repealing China's most favored nation trading status. So there's a lot going on, and we'll get right into it here.
Yeah, and I'm excited because there's a lot of misinformation that's out there regarding the Secure Trade Act and obviously the new steel products under the 232. So again, we talked about it last week. It just depends which side of the media you're listening to. You have one side that's just totally demagoguing this. Like
those are the globalists, Michael. Those are the globalists.
So now you're naming them now. Oh, we have a name.
I'm going to name and shame them.
Am I listening to the same? Look, the American consumer, the American public, and even the American CEOs are just getting tired of all this. Let's just be positive. Let's call a spade with a spade. If it's green, it's green. If it's red, it's red. And what this show is going to do, if you just join us, we're going to point out this to our audience. We got to have a base. We got to have a foundation. And we're going to start with our foundation, our base. We're going to start on this little network with, who we have, and we're going to build a good foundation. And then that way, when we can start listening to social media or Facebook, and you see all the positive things that's happening. And that's what I want to start with, the foundation. And Zach, I mean, that's what you're doing. You and John, that's what you're doing. You're laying out a good foundation, and I'm excited. Right. But we got to address some of these issues, the misconceptions, and there are some misconceptions. Again, decide which side of the aisle you're looking at. You know, we talked about this last week also. It's either half empty, the glass is half empty, or half full. Why one side is always half empty? And I want to say our side is always half full, and that's just the analogy of this. Does that make sense?
It's always half full. My glass always.
Yeah.
I want to give you a little good news story about Guardian Bikes here. This is the kind of story that we're talking about, the glass half full story. This is a company that's really leading the way, and they're a model for reshoring and making jobs in America. And John and Charles were out there last week. John, tell us a little bit about Guardian Bikes and what they're doing out there in Seymour, Indiana.
Zach, this is so exciting. Brian Riley was the winner on Shark Tank a few years ago. Today, him and his business partner are the only operation in this country building bicycles. They're going fully vertical. They're building everything from the frames to the handlebars, you name it, right here in this country. They're employing over 250 folks in a little town called Seymour, Indiana, putting people back in high wage positions. And guess what? They're doing more than just building bicycles. They're building up a community that has seen manufacturing leave their town. They're rising up. They're allowing restaurants to come in. The mayor was there. They were thrilled. We had about 300 folks in attendance. Mark Cuban was there. Chuck got a chance to sit down and talk to Mark. It was really exciting. I know, Chuck, anything you want to add there about the visit?
Yeah, I mean, a tremendous positive energy. And, I came, Mark Cuban, obviously, if you're just sort of vaguely aware of his X profile in the run up to the election, he came across as a critic of tariff policy. But actually, when you talk to him, his views are much more, pro-tariff than you might think, certainly now that we're, the election's over. So I came across very impressed with Mark Cuban's commitment to American manufacturing and the tremendous work they're doing at Guardian as well.
Yeah, well, 250 jobs in Indiana is a big deal, and making bikes here in America is a big deal too, because nobody else has done it in years, right? People have been offshoring, and Guardian is fully vertically integrated. Is that correct? They're making, other people might bring pieces in and put it together, but they're making everything, correct?
They're making it here, Zach. They have beautiful equipment. We got a chance to tour the facility. That was the launch of this Independence Day or Independent Supply Chain Day that they had to celebrate their new facility. I mean, you should see some of the machines they have in there. Beautiful, precision pipe, robotic cutting machines to, cut the pipe appropriately for the bike to be built. They have, robotic welding machines from Germany. I mean, Chuck, it was some of the nicest equipment I think we've ever seen.
Right, exactly. And they're saying, because other countries have relied on low wages, they haven't even made the investments in this. But I want to make an important point, because I'm sure there's some listeners thinking, oh, great, I'm looking forward to spending, $5,000 for a bicycle or something, or, this. Not at all. And I actually went deep into the history of bike manufacturing and the offshoring of bikes. Bikes, just like flatware, they were offshored back in the 1950s. So in 1950, we sold 2 million bikes a year, and 99.9% of those bikes were made in America. It wasn't a monopoly. We had 10 high volume bike manufacturers, competitive domestic market. The average bike sold for $30. That's about 412 today. So in 1950, we had an all-American bike market, all-American steel, and bikes were cheaper than they are now. And so we've offshored that for nothing. We gained nothing. All those towns, these 10 communities that were benefited from high volume bike manufacture, gutted. Consumers saw no benefit. there was no upside to offshore in this critical industry. So I think that's a really interesting takeaway that we're, bringing this back, and it's going to be good for our steel mills and good for the whole steel supply chain. So just a wonderful news story.
And just to underscore too, Chuck, they're using automation, but they're not eliminating jobs. They're making jobs using automation. This is how they're competitive, right? That's how they're getting ahead.
Yeah, that's right. And to be clear, the automation comes with cutting the steel frame, but they make the point that that it's actually still very labor. Bicycle manufacturing will remain very labor intensive. Basically, adding all of those parts from the handlebars to the derailleur, that's all done by hand everywhere in the world, and it's going to be done by hand in Seymour, Indiana. But they pay great wages. And actually, I had the historical data because there was this great 1955 Tariff Commission report. We lost 40% of the bike market between 1950 and 1955. That was from the UK. Why? They didn't outcompete us. The value of the pound just collapsed, and so they just took over our bike market. But back then the wages were about $1.50, $1.90 an hour. Which translates to about $24 an hour now, which is actually, Seymour, again, that's higher than the average. It's higher than, starting wage at a lot of automotive plants even. So just a great story about good, well-paying jobs, benefits, the works.
That's a great point there, Chuck. We'll end with that for this segment. We're going to come back and talk a little bit more about what makes them competitive and what's making some other segments competitive too with these Section 232 trade actions. Michael, just before the break, we were talking about all the good things in Seymour, Indiana, over at Guardian Bikes, the jobs they're making high volume bikes right here in America. And one of the things that's helped them has been some of these steel tariffs, these tariffs that are going on right now. And I know a lot of your listeners, Michael, they might be a little concerned. People wonder, well, are tariffs going to raise my price? How do tariffs help consumers? They do help consumers. They bring them new innovative products, new choices, and they help raise the wages of the consumers that are actually able to buy products. Henry Ford wanted to pay good wages so that people could afford to buy his cars. And that's exactly what's going on in Seymour, Indiana. But we had a lot of action with the steel tariffs this week, the Section 232, and those kind of things. The list got expanded. John, can you tell us a little bit about what happened last week with the Section 232 tariff list?
Well, they added about 250 new products, Chuck. Is that about right? It was over 250 new products to the Steel 232 action. And this is great news. I mean, this is the administration delivering on their promise to ensure that we have the necessary product on these steel items that we need. And I think this is just the beginning. I tell folks the best is yet to come as it relates to steel. There's more steel actions coming, but this was something that we had anticipated, and we're glad to see it's out. Chuck, I know there's been some big wins for CPA members. Do you want to talk a little bit? What does it mean? What's the practical impact of these new added items to the 232 action? How does it actually benefit the CPA members?
Yeah, so we represent a lot of downstream, metal users, right? American businesses, custom fabricators that buy metal, but they, just the way the traditional trade laws were written, there's like an anti-dumping or a countervailing duty order that goes on steel, on rolled steel, flatbed, and it raises their costs, but they don't get any import relief. So it's been really counterproductive for this last century. So this is finally with the inclusion process now, where the small business fabricators can get their products included in the tariff relief so that they're not being, squeezed out. We call that tariff inversion. And one of a longtime CPA member, he's been with us forever, is Cheryl Manufacturing, Greg over there. And couldn't be more delighted. He's the last flatware manufacturer in America, forks, knives, spoons. His brand is Liberty Tabletop. I've got it at home. Can't recommend it enough. He buys American stainless steel. And that back in 2018, Commerce had made that finding. They're like, hey, our mills can't rely on just defense procurement alone. We need a commercial marketplace. We need people like Greg to actually sustain our mills. And so that was something that happened on Friday. We were very pleased to help Cheryl Manufacturing in getting cutlery and flatware added to the steel action. So they've got an additional 50% tariff now on cutlery. And that's tremendous. And then in the same month that we get de minimis close, so I think it's going to be a real win for his business. We did the same thing on dumbbells and kettlebells as well. They're already getting interest from Target and others, so that's just great.
And Chuck, from the consumer's perspective, again, people are worried, well, are these tariffs going to raise my prices? Because that's what, we're talking about. Some of these companies are going to be able to have a healthy margin and pay good wages. But the reality is what we've seen and what these examples are is about bringing more volume to American manufacturing. So our steel mills, they have to charge a price if they're at 60% capacity. When they get to 80% and 90% capacity, they can actually lower the price of their product and be more competitive. And that's what we're doing. We're making it a rich landscape here in America of more manufacturers, more competitors, more sources of supply, and that helps to mitigate any cost increases. Isn't that correct?
That's exactly right. So we're going to, Sherrill Manufacturing, they're using the old Oneida factory, right? Well, Oneida Flatwares, now it's a brand owned by a private equity firm that's all imports. The volume will go ramp way up, help actually drive their prices down. One of the things that has kept them going is supplying the Navy. That's going to make the Navy's procurement cheaper, right? Yeah. So it's going to help our Department of Defense as well. So no, this is all gravy. And these things matter. So it's the brightest thing that's happening in this whole last year for me is this new tariff inclusion process. It's going to really strengthen the actions.
And you mentioned the closing of the de minimis loophole. I want to let the listeners know a little bit more about that, because that's a fight we've been fighting at CPA for over a decade. And what is exactly the de minimis loophole, Chuck?
Yeah, I mean, it was undermining everything in our society, product safety standards to, rule of law and narcotics, traffic policing. But that the de minimis loophole simply said, if any foreign vendor scribbles on their shipment that the value is worth less than 800 in their country, it could just come in tax-free, not even, and worse than duty-free and tax-free. We wouldn't even really inspect it. We just wave it through. So that was a disaster. And it just got so untenable, the Temu, the whole internet of fakes, counterfeit contraband. And then we finally had success. And in 4 more days, it's going to be repealed globally. It's already been repealed for products of China for a couple of months. But, to be really effective, it just has to go away completely. And that's finally happening in 4 more days.
That's fantastic news for people who make consumer products in America, as well as a lot of American retailers. There's e-commerce retailers and people here who employ Americans who actually have warehouses and stores. They might import a product, but they do have a substantial footprint here and they pay taxes. And they were even being undercut too by these direct from China shipment to your door.
That's right.
Like you said, Chuck. Unsafe. There has been a rash. When I was a kid, people used to worry about plug-in electric blankets, and that all went away a long time ago. I'm old now, but we started worrying about it again because these counterfeit, uninspected, unsafe products were coming in and they were catching on fire recently. So, this is the kind of garbage that we got to stop. And I'm so glad to hear we're closing the de minimis loophole.
Yeah. I will make a quick point. 62% of vendors on Amazon today are not based in the United States. On Amazon.com, on the US Amazon, 62%. So, when we were younger, Zach, patriotic was buying American made. Now you're patriotic just to buy from an American retailer. Going to Barnes and Noble is a patriotic act at this point because you're at least buying from an American retailer. So yeah, we got to fix more in the customs.
All right, we got to wrap up. All right, we're gonna have to take a short break. Got to pay some bills right here on the Chairman's Countdown with Zach Mottl, right here on the Made America Radio Network. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is the Cajun contractor, Michael King. Welcome to the Chairman's Countdown with Zach Mottl, right here on the Made America Radio Network. If you just joined us, we are having a great conversation on the topics that will convince you that Made in America products, Made in America technology is back. Zach, I tell you, wow, we're just rolling along right now. Let's just jump right into it. I know you have another subject of conversation you want to talk with John, right?
Yeah. We were just talking before the break about all the good things going on in the trade world that are helping make things in America again. And there was some big news last week. There was a bill introduced the Golden Stube Secure Trade Act. And I want to bring John Toomey, the president from the Coalition for Prosperous America, and Charles Benoit, our trade counsel. Come on and please tell us, John, a little bit more about that bill.
Yeah, well, this is a great bill, Zach. This is a bipartisan effort with Jared Golden, who was a CPA award winner this year for our Trade Hero Award. Every year, CPA gives an award to both a Democrat and a Republican in both the House and the Senate for their outstanding leadership in addressing trade and manufacturing. And Jared was the winner for the Democrats in the House this year. He has a bill with Greg Steube, Republican from Florida, out of Sarasota. He's a member on the Ways and Means Committee, the committee that controls trade. The bill would do two things. It would first codify in law President Trump's 10% universal tariff, and it would also repeal China's most favored nation status. And we can dive into both of them with Chuck, but this is a great bipartisan effort, something that has been called for now for quite some time, getting rid of China's MFN status. And we certainly need to codify President Trump's revenue tariffs. So Chuck, what's the analysis? What's it say? How great is it? What should the listeners be expecting?
Yeah, so it's really important. I call it like basic homework, right? So the main law the president has used for the sectoral tariffs are safe. Okay, they're using a law called Section 232. So the sectoral ones where they go industry by industry, those are pretty safe. But all these country tariffs, they're less so. Okay, so we've got two courts ruled against them. The name of the statute is the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, and we've got two rulings now saying that they can't use it. It could go either way, and that if we lose that, then that's going to be pretty bad. And there's a decent chance that might happen. And so Congress codifying them is really important.
How much revenue, Chuck, has the government pulled in? What's their monthly pull in right now? What are we generating from these tariffs? Do you know?
Yeah, so we've passed 150 billion revenue, and it's 300 billion by the end of the year. And one of the alarming things I point out is that in this litigation,
Chuck, we're running surpluses for the first time.
Yeah, I think it was that right. So in June we ran a surplus, so a budgetary surplus. So yeah, it's a really important revenue. I mean, and we got to lock it down. We should not be relying on 300 billion or 400 billion a year in tariff revenue going forward off of these presidential orders. Congress should codify them, make them, there's a lot of benefits to that beyond just legal challenges, but given certainty. So, I say the president ran on the two highlights of his trade platform outside of sectoral were the 10% universal. He ran on that. That was on the Agenda 47 website. And then repealing China's most favored nation status, which puts China at about a supplemental 30% tariff. So the Secure Trades Act does those two. It codifies the two central principles that the president campaigned on. And by the way, these weren't even just Trump's principles. The China MFN thing, that became Republican Party policy at the convention last summer. And then there's been bipartisan recommendations in the last Congress from the House China Select Committee and then also the U.S. China Congressional Commission. So, no excuse for Congress to not get these done. So we'll be pushing for that big time this end of year push.
Yeah, this is fantastic, Chuck. Thanks for all that great analysis, because this is, like you said, this is a big part of President Trump's agenda. It's a big part of the Coalition for Prosperous America's agenda, but it's also bipartisan. This is America's agenda. I mean, Congressman Golden, he's a solid Democrat out of Maine, and he sees the value of making things and having jobs in America where we work in factories, we produce things, we have value, we have worth, we have, there's a lot of pride that comes from actually making something. You go home at the end of the day, it's a very satisfying job, and he gets it. And so I hope we're going to pass this. It's called the Secure Trade Act. It's House Bill 4978. If any of the listeners are into this, they want to call into their congressman, call them and say, hey, you're into House Resolution 4978, you support it, and you hope your congressman will vote for it when he gets a chance.
Well, I tell you what, I think accountability is the key here. And I think these legislators now are starting to realize that it's not business as usual where they can just do carte blanche, not what the people that elect them want them to do, but not what they want to do. They have to start doing what the people. And if you keep putting the information out there, which we're doing right now, then they're going to be held accountable for the first time. Or they simply not going to be in, like you said,
right, King. That's exactly right.
They're not going to be in office anymore.
They shouldn't be in office because, for a long time, they've been voting to take your money, the listeners' tax money. Finally, we're collecting taxes from somebody else. We're collecting $300 billion from foreigners, from foreign importers, and Congress should get their act together and pass the bill to make sure they keep the revenue. This is the first time I've seen a bunch of Congress people not grab a bunch of cash. There's a pile on the table, and it's all paid by foreigners.
I just want to go off track here a minute, okay, because this is important what I'm about to say. Let's face it. I tell you, I commend the right on the low margin that we have in the House of Representatives. I mean, to get everything that's being accomplished on a slim margin. But I need to tell you, please be focused in the state of Texas. Right now, this is going to be huge because the right has a chance to get 5 more red seats. That's going to totally dictate the policy program of what our president can do without having all this obstruction that he's having. And you're making some good points, but pay attention to that. That's going to be a big point in when we reface the congressional map. That's going to dictate the legislation that we're going to have. Would you agree?
And King, I couldn't agree more, but I want to go back to what Zach said there for one second. I want to add an anecdote here. All right, Zach, you said most favored nation sat away. Okay, so for the listeners, China has received this most favored nation status as special treatment since 2001. America has lost 3.4 million manufacturing jobs directly tied to Congress passing most favored nation status for China. That was a Republican-led effort at the time in Congress. Bill Clinton signed it into law. And just to point out, there was a gentleman from Texas. So King's talking about Texas. His name was Bill Archer. He was the chairman of Ways and Means. He was a Republican at the time. He championed to get this bill through, said it was going to be great for our country. His district and his surrounding area lost 65,000 jobs, direct manufacturing jobs, as a result, well past time to turn this off, turn the valve off, and most favored American worker, the American manufacturer. We got to pass this bill. It's a Stubbe and Golden, and couldn't be more happy to see this.
Great point. But Zach, all right. Wow. We're going to be taking a short break shortly, but a lot going on, right?
We got a lot going on, and we're going to keep it going on, Michael.
All right, so what's coming up in the next segment, though? I know we want to keep this thing rolling.
The last segment, I'm gonna leave John. I'm gonna hand the wheel over to John Toomey for the last segment, and he's gonna hit on this Aurobindo. This is an Indian generic drug manufacturer, Aurobindos, and they're trying to take over a generic drug manufacturer in the Czech Republic. And Chuck's going to tell you about why that's important and why we need to pay attention to that.
Yeah, you know what? It's little building blocks and it's little steps that we're going to have to do. And we've already shot the gun at the bow. So it's out there. And now as we get on with this and we put this information out there, then we're going to have to really, really hold tight, because here's the thing that's going to happen. And I'm going 2 years down the road here. Okay. Our president that we have is limited term. So we're going to be talking eventually in the future with direction who's going to take over that mantle. We're not to that point yet, but it will matter. Okay. All right. We're going to have to take a short break. You're listening to, that's right, the Chairman's Countdown with Zach Mottl right here on the Made America Radio Network. We're going to come right back with some more information. Stay tuned. Don't go nowhere. You hear? Welcome to the Chairman's Countdown with Zach Mottl right here on the Made America Radio Network. If you just join us on this late hour, we're discussing all sorts of information. We've been discussing Guardian Bikes, the manufacturing plant in Seymour, Indiana. We just talked about the new steel products under the 232 and also the Secure Trade Act. And man, John, I tell you, I'm excited, you and Charles, the information that we're bringing. But let's talk about this opposition to you guys, this acquisition, and maybe we can get an update on this, John.
Yeah, no, King, we can talk about this. So we've talked a lot about steel. We've talked about bikes. In the last segment, we talked about generic drugs. And so we want to take everyone across the pond here. We're going to travel to little old Europe because like most battles, they don't always occur right here on our shores, but this one we're tracking. And that is a possible takeover of a generic drug company in Czechoslovakia, in Prague. The importance of this is the folks who are trying to take this company over is a company called Aurobindo out of India. Reported on, if you've been following CPA's work, where we've tracked their sourcing of products to U.S. sanctioned Chinese companies within China. They have documented violations of U.S. pharmaceutical regulations, documented violations of European pharmaceutical regulations. We've linked their suppliers back to the People's Republic of China and their military industries. We are very concerned about this because, as we mentioned previously, King, generic drugs are 90% of all prescriptions in this country. Right now, we rely a lot on India and China. Unfortunately, we import a lot of that. We're trying to get off of Asian-made generics. We're trying to empower the domestic producer here in the U.S. And we see this possible takeover as a way of India circumventing the parameters that the U.S. is trying to put in place to ensure that we have stable, safe supply of medicine so that when the listeners go to the pharmacy to get their prescription, they can be rest assured that that medicine is made with good manufacturing practices and is not, cutting corners possibly, or, the medicine may not be working as we've seen in some reports before. And Chuck, I know you've been tracking this a little bit from anything you'd like to say on this possible takeover and really, the national security concerns that we see at CPA because of it.
Well, I was talking about what the president campaigned on earlier, and medicine was the special one. Medicine, he really flagged that, on the Agenda 47 website. It's like, this is coming home, right? It was, I'd say, and then automotive, it was kind of almost as strong, but those are the two sectors, medicine and automotive, that he really cared about. So I think that as the Department of Commerce undertakes this pharmaceutical action, it's a tough one. This is a tough nut to crack and get right and, land this plane. So, what they're trying to do is tremendous. And, I really hope and pray that they, for all the support they can get.
Do you see, Chuck, the inclusion rounds that just came out? We talked about on the last show. And for those of you who weren't listening, we talked about the steel inclusion round process, which was a historic process to add additional steel items to the 232 steel tariffs. Do you see inclusion rounds, Chuck, playing a role for generic drugs moving forward? Do you see a lane for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is like a huge process and a huge undertaking and a huge industry. And so getting the process is what I'd recommend above all, right? So using that inclusion process, whether it's triennial, like the metals, or quarterly, like for automotive, have it set up so that if there's a generic drug manufacturer, they're capitalized and they've got a plan, and they say, hey, we can supply 30-50% of the market for this drug next year. But to make this investment, we're asking for is to know that we're not going to be undercut by fabricators in Asia. I think that's the beauty of the inclusion process is it can be used to facilitate that. And much like we've been doing in sugar for decades, where we adjust the quota every year based on forecast domestic consumption and forecast domestic production and overseas production, right? So there's three things. We've been doing this in sugar, so we know how the government knows how to do it. take that same approach to pharma via the inclusion process, and I think they can have a solid mechanism there for achieving the president's goal of bringing back essential medicine production.
So take it product by product, allow the
Yep.
inclusion process to play itself out. But this is historic, right? Like I said, we've never seen an administration take this approach before where, they're seeking input from the public to say, hey, we need, right? In the past, they had exclusion rounds, right? Or exclusion process. There's no more exclusions, right? I mean, exclusions are gone. They're out the window.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, that was the flip on the words is in February of this year, they came out on the steel and aluminum front and they just nuked all the exclusions, which were, importers who had claimed, hey, I really, I can't get this here. So just let me pay nothing. And often they just hadn't talked to people like Zach, our jobbers, custom fabricators of the country. You will make whatever you want them to make. And so all those exclusions were gone. And they flipped to the inclusion round for all the small businesses who are like, hey, I can make this thing, this steel product, this aluminum product. Can we add that to the tariff action? So it's a huge, it's absolutely historic. This has never happened. I mean, this before 1934, this used to happen at the congressional level, but albeit a bit slower.
All right.
Or once a decade.
All right,
I'm
going to have to jump in. Time is about wrapping up here, but the last comment I want to make, that's the difference of being proactive and reactive. And I think us now starting to be proactive is going to make a difference. Well, we're going to have to run. John, Chuck, great show. We definitely want to thank the chairman himself, Zach Mottl. We have to see you next week. And if you have a comment or a question, just go ahead and email me at michaelking1350@yahoo.com. Till next week, right here on the Chairman Show with Zach Mottl, right here on the Made in America Radio Network. Till next week, bon les gens. We'll see you next week. Yahoo!